In episode 149 of the 40 Plus Fitness podcast, we meet with Larry Olmsted on his book, Real Food, Fake Food: Why You Don't Know What You're Eating and What You Can Do About It. The show notes for this episode are posted at 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/149. Have you decided you're ready to make a change? To reclaim your health and fitness? The 40 Plus Fitness Podcast is here for you. I'm your host, Alan Meisner. I'm an NSAM certified personal trainer with a specialization in corrective exercise and fitness nutrition. Let me be your coach as you find your way on your health and fitness journey. All right, let's go. Larry Olmsted is an award-winning columnist with the US Today and Forbes. He writes extensively on food, wine, and spirits. And now with Real Food, Fake Food, he's a best-selling author. So Larry, welcome to 40 Plus Fitness.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
You know, your book, Real Food, Fake Food, was a really interesting read. I really enjoyed just the reading of it. It's I read a lot of health and fitness books because I like to read the books before I talk to the author. And just kind of going through your book, it was a very good read. Although you seem to have a good romance with food. As you're reading, it's like, gee, I got to try that. And well, now I got to try that. And I'm sitting there scribbling notes of links and places that I need to go so I can buy some better olive oil and I can buy some real cheese. And so I really kind of appreciate your appreciation of food.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, I came at it from the perspective of a food writer. So, my major thing is taste and flavor, but it's a nice coincidence that when you buy these real foods that taste better, they are almost always also healthier for you.
Absolutely. And I recognize it from wine. I'm a little bit more of a wine connoisseur. It's where I spend most of my time. And, going to Napa where they're making the wine, or, being in a foreign country like France or Italy and trying the wines there. And you're just like, this doesn't taste like the wine that I'm buying at home. So I buy a case or two of it and have it shipped. But you had a quote in the book that I found very interesting. It was right at the beginning, kind of to set this all out. And you said, well, you didn't say this was a quote you had from somebody, Kelsey Timmerman, in her book. I guess it's a book, Where Am I Eating? And it said, there's nothing more fundamental than knowing what you are putting in your mouth. And I think the reason that resonated with me is, as a personal trainer, when I'm working directly with clients, I might get, 3 to 5 hours a week. And then they're spending the other 170 some odd hours somewhere else. And so for us to try to get them results in the gym, we're giving them those tips of, eat better food, better quality food. When it's more nutritious for you, you're going to tend to eat less, and that's going to help you meet your goals. And so I really did appreciate that quote. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. Because I think a lot of people don't think about what they are putting in their mouth, especially with, today our processed food. Like, I think of a hamburger as being, really ground beef and a roll being wheat. I mean flour, water, yeast, maybe salt. You can make a hamburger with 5 ingredients, but when you go to the drive-thru and you get a hamburger, it doesn't have 5 ingredients. It has 50 or 80 ingredients. And I think people don't really think about that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And so, it's funny. I was talking earlier about you seem to have a romance with food, but you're familiar with the term catfishing, where someone on the internet kind of pretends to be somebody else and fools someone into a romantic relationship. I think they're doing that with our food, is what the book is saying, is they're basically catfishing us on our food. Now, when you talked about fake food, of course, that's a compelling title. I'm like, okay, when he's talking about fake food, what exactly does he mean? And you define that, but you're not talking about the plastic fruit that my grandmother had on the coffee table back when I was a kid. Fake food in this context means something else. So could you take a little bit of time to tell us what that means?
Absolutely. I mean, I broadly define it as when you don't get what you think you're buying. It's not so much a judgment of the quality of the food, because if you go to a fast food drive-in and again, you buy that burger that's 99 cents and it doesn't say 100% beef or Angus, it just says hamburger, you kind of get what you expect, I think, even though it might be a really low quality product. It's more if you order a hamburger and they give you something that's a completely different food. And there's really 3 different levels of fake food. One is you get something completely different. So you order red snapper and you get tilapia. It's a different species. It's not at all what you ordered. One is where you get sort of a inferior version of what you ordered, which is, maybe where you buy a juice and it is juice, but it's not the juice you think you're getting, or it's diluted with other things. And then the third is the area of, and this is generally what's known as geographic indications. A lot of foods are named for the places that they come from. The most famous example would be Champagne, but it's also, Parmesan cheese from Parma, Italy, and Vidalia onions from Vidalia, Georgia, and Kona coffee. There's hundreds of products named for where they come from. And in most cases, those are not protected under U.S. trademark law. So it's very easy for restaurants and retailers to use those terms in a really deceitful way. Kobe beef is a great example. Lots and lots of restaurants claim to serve Kobe beef, the implication being it's the famous Kobe beef from Japan. It is not. You're getting ripped off, but it's legal. So some of these are legal and some of them are not. But in all cases, my definition is you're not getting what you think you're buying.
And again, the kind of the unfairness of it is really, I guess, what I really just, as I was reading through the book, I really struggled with is, some people are really trying to do the right thing, and in a sense, they're being duped. And I do happen to think that the quality, when they're doing that, very seldom do I think that they're going to supply you with the same quality of food that you would have originally got, or else they would have went ahead and spent the money and bought the quality of food that you ordered or wanted. Now, I'm a big fan of fish. I probably eat fish every single day. It's a big staple in my eating. But after reading your book, I don't know that I'm going to eat fish at restaurants anymore. Do you mind taking a little bit of time to talk about the fish supply and where we're getting our fish from and what's going on with our fish?
Sure. And in a perfect world, you should eat a lot of fish. I mean, it's probably the best protein source for both us and for the planet, especially with a growing population. But that's in a perfect world. In the real world, we don't get the fish that we think we're getting a lot of the time. The biggest national study showed that at both retail and restaurants across the country, more than a third of the seafood in this country is mislabeled, meaning that you're not getting typically the species that you're buying. Sometimes the labeling differentiation is you're getting the species, but it's not like you buy what you think is wild caught salmon and you're getting farmed instead. But so a third of the time, and that includes seafood specialty stores. So in some cases, it's much, much higher. As I mentioned before, red snapper is like the number one most faked fish in this country. And in one big national study, 94% of the time you order red snapper, you don't get it. So, some are more, some are less. The more expensive the fish, the more likely it is to be faked. So once you no longer get what you think you're getting, you're often getting a pretty inferior substitute that could be farmed, could contain drugs that you don't want, that you don't know are in there, could be higher in mercury and heavy metals. And all of those problems are exacerbated the more you eat fish. So, if you're going to eat seafood once a month and you get a fish that's like a little higher in mercury than you expected, in the long term, it's probably not that bad. But if you eat fish every day, it becomes a real problem when you're getting something that's very different from what you think you're putting in your body.
Yeah, I guess, in looking where this is happening in the food chain, because again, there's a whole line of people from the fishermen all the way through to the restaurant or to the store. There's a lot of places in that cycle where this can break down.
Absolutely. And this is actually pretty interesting because this isn't even in my book. This is kind of almost brand new. For a long time, the assumption in the industry, because seafood fraud has been with us for a long time, it's been very well studied. Because the supply chain is so opaque and the average piece of fish travels thousands of miles and passes through 8 different middlemen before it reaches you, the assumption was always that at each time it turned over, there was this opportunity to defraud us. But the FDA just did a big study using DNA testing and determined that at the last point of wholesale distribution before it got to the consumer-facing entity, either a restaurant or a retail store, 85% of the seafood was correctly labeled, which means more than half of the fraud we're seeing is occurring just at the last leg, either the restaurant or the retail store doing it intentionally. And restaurants have often claimed that, I got it that way from my distributor. It said this, and nobody could really prove them wrong. But now it suggests that restaurants are much more to blame than was earlier thought.
And I guess that kind of correlates. I remember years ago a story about, it was Food Lion. I was living in North Carolina, or my mother was living in North Carolina. I was there visiting, and they had taken the food, the kind of the meats that had gotten to that point of being right at expiry. They were basically taking that and then cooking with it, and then basically cook the food and then put it out there for 4 or 5 more days. And so it was kind of one of those things where they found basically someone went and did the expose wearing the camera in the back of the kitchen, and prove that they were doing it. And they weren't just doing it at one restaurant. It was systemic across there. And so I would just kind of imagine that, and I've worked in restaurants, so I know, they're always hammering on you, keep your food costs low, keep your food costs low. And so I think there's that economic pressure sometimes puts people in that frame of mind that no one's going to know because this is going to have all the sauces and, all the breading or whatever you're going to have on your fish. So no one's going to be able to recognize that. You did have one thing in the book that I thought was pretty interesting of how when we're cooking salmon, we could potentially recognize whether we've gotten some bad salmon or not.
Well, it's not so much bad salmon, it's wild caught versus farmed. And, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with aquaculture. We get about 40% of our seafood now from fish farms, and fish farms can be very clean and very well run, and they're particularly good for bivalve oysters and mussels, as well as for freshwater fish like trout and catfish. Where they've traditionally not been so good is for carnivorous ocean fish like salmon and for shrimp. And so a lot of people don't want to eat farm salmon. And again, my thing isn't that I'm telling you shouldn't eat farm salmon. I want it to be that if you want to eat farm salmon, you can. And if you want to eat wild-caught salmon, you can. But the problem is because wild-caught salmon is more valuable and more desirable, a lot of people substitute farm for wild-caught. So what's happening, Consumer Reports did a test. They went to supermarkets and they bought the more expensive wild-caught salmon, yet more than half the time it wasn't wild-caught. It was just the same farm salmon selling for a few dollars more a pound. And what you're referring to, USA Today did a thing where they cooked it because the reason salmon is pink is not because salmon is naturally pink. It eats this microorganisms, krill in the water that turn it pink. So when they farm the fish, because they can't eat those wild microorganisms, they have to put something in its food to make it turn pink, which, used to be dye. It's improved a little bit. There's some of them are dyed, some of them are not. But when USA Today cooked it in a pan, they said they could see the kind of pink color leaching out, leaving like a pinkish liquid in the pan, which you really don't get when you cook wild salmon. And the other thing, that you can tell is they should look different. Like a professional in the fish industry can recognize wild salmon by sight, but since there's several different kinds, consumers can't really do that, but it should look different from farm salmon. So if they have two salmons in the case at the store and one says wild caught and one looked farm, they should look different. You don't have to know what the difference is, but they should not look if they look exactly the same, that's a big red flag.
And I just have to believe that the salmon that are eating krill, because krill is, again, is another, is going to provide additional omega-3s. I just have to kind of believe that fish is going to be a little bit healthier for us than the farmed. And, beyond all the heavy metals and all the things and all the pesticides and things that could be in that water, because, a lot of times the fish farms are right next to farmland. At least I know that's the case with catfish. They tend to be really close because they typically will use, the soybeans or the corn as a feedstock for them. So they want to be close so they don't have to transport the food very far. But, maybe I'm wrong, but in the long term, I want my fish to be fresh. I want my fish to be wild caught and healthy, just generally healthy for me and not something that's going to damage my health.
I was just going to say with the salmon in particular, when you buy wild-caught salmon, in this country, you're almost always talking about Alaskan salmon. Almost all of the wild-caught salmon commercially sold in this country comes from Alaska. And Alaska has unusually clean water. It's very frequently tested. It's a really well-run fishery. So more than with other farm versus wild issues, because a lot of wild-caught fish come from the Atlantic, they come from all over the world. But when we get salmon, it's almost always from Alaska. And that's why I think it's worth kind of seeking out wild-caught salmon, because Alaska produces great, really clean fish.
I guess I got some from Canada one time, and it was funny because I bought the smoked fish because, I don't typically eat when I'm flying, and I knew when I landed I only had about an hour. So I was like, I'm going to go ahead and buy this smoked fish. It's a little expensive, but, I'll have something to eat when I get to the airport because I don't really have time to stop. And I was walking through the airport, and before I even got on the plane, and I'm like, let me open this up and taste it. And I took one bite, and I'm like, okay, I'm eating this right now. It was just so good. Now, you give us a tip, and I love this tip as far as how you can kind of maybe potentially bypass this. I guess you could still kind of get duped, but going to the onshore, basically the coastal stores that sell fish directly, the fish markets where the fishermen are coming in and selling directly to the market, and then the market's selling directly to you. We have one in Pensacola called Joe Patty's, and I love that place. I walk in, it's like the Walmart of fish. at least for the Gulf Coast area. So anything you want, shrimp, oysters, anything that's in season, you're going to have there. I like that tip, and I would encourage folks that, when they're out and about looking for fish, if they have a reputable fish market, that's going to be the better place to go to at least, kind of at least trust your food a little bit more. So I appreciate that tip in the book.
Well, also those kind of markets, typically you can actually see them cutting the fish as well, because, you mentioned it earlier, in whitefish in particular, and among the most faked whitefish are red snapper and grouper, which I know is very popular where you are on the Gulf Coast. But once you fillet it, and it's very hard for people to tell one from another, especially in a restaurant once it's breaded, sauced, buried in a mound of stuff. So when you go to one of those markets and you see them cutting up grouper and laying it out on ice, that when you start with the whole fish, you can always see what it is. But most Americans do not buy fish whole or buy it at a place where they ever see a whole fish.
Yeah, my wife really doesn't like my habit of, when we get a chance, I'm definitely ordering whole fish. She's seen me do that a few times and just, shakes her head. It's like, why won't they just cut the head off? And I'm like, because, actually you can look at the eyes of a fish and tell if it's a fresh fish when they bring it to your table. So, most Asian and most Europeans, the fish comes to the table whole.
That's absolutely true. And I have a friend in New England where I live who is a chef from the Dominican Republic in the Caribbean, and he only buys whole fish. And he says the same thing. He can just look at the eyes and tell how long it's been, sitting there, whether it's going to be good.
Like I said, thank you. Now we want to move into olive oil because, again, this is one of those other things that we're told, okay, if you're going to eat fats, obviously you want to eat the healthier fats. And I equate that to, obviously most of us equate that to olive oil, of course, fish oil, and some of the others, coconut oil, those types of things. So, if we're looking to put more olive oil into our diet, there might be some problems in shopping for olive oil. Could you kind of go into that?
Yeah, there are. And I want to just preface this by saying, you said you eat fish, almost every day. You love fish. I feel the same way about olive oil. I'm obsessed with olive oil. I love it. I use way, way more than the average American does. I cook with it. I put it on things. I use it almost daily. And it is the most heart healthy of all the widely used commercial oils we have. But there's also been numerous other studies linking the benefits, everything from anti-Alzheimer's, anti-carcinogen, anti-aging agent, helps you process vitamins better when you eat olive oil. It seems like every time they do a study, they find something else that's good about it. So, I didn't want to scare people off eating olive oil, but the problem is, you get the better nutritional value as well as much better taste when you use good extra virgin olive oil. And a lot of what is labeled extra virgin in this country is not good extra virgin, or maybe not even extra virgin at all. And so olive oil is graded, and just like when you go to the gas pump and there's regular gas, premium, and ultra premium. So extra virgin is supposed to represent the very top quality tier of olive oil. And when I went to Spain, which is the largest olive oil producing country in the world, and met with one producer, he told me that maybe 8 to 10% of the olive oil made in Europe should qualify as extra virgin. It's like getting an A+ in school. Yet almost all of the olive oil sold in this country is labeled extra virgin. It's almost hard to buy olive oil that's not. And different studies, Consumer Reports, 60 Minutes, University of California, Davis, there's been a number of them, have found that the majority of supermarket olive oils labeled extra virgin do not meet the standard. Because when they grade olive oil, there's two levels. There's laboratory testing, so there's certain benchmarks. It has to have a free fatty acid number of this and different levels. And then there's also a sensory component, which is rare in food, where there's actually a tasting panel has to basically pass the quality of the olive oil. So when you've had really good olive oil, which I use and you can get, in a lot of places, once you taste it, it tastes so much different from the kind of big bottle, big can, supermarket olive oil a lot of Americans are used to, that you can't go back, but you have to taste the good stuff for the first time.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the keys is once you kind of do taste the good stuff, you can kind of tell when what they're not, when they're not giving it to you. Like I know you go to a basic restaurant and you say, I'd like olive oil and bring me some vinegar, balsamic vinegar. And you're just basically going to mix that for your salad dressing. It's obviously not the good stuff for the most part. Now, when we're looking for olive oil, I know you mentioned in the book some clubs, or at least one club where you can order olive oil and they'll kind of send you like a pack every month or every quarter. Could you remind me what that one is? Because I did write that link down somewhere, but I I seem to have misplaced it.
That's where I personally get my olive oil from. It's called the Fresh Pressed Olive Oil Club, and you get a quarterly shipment of 3 bottles. So every 3 months, 3 bottles, 12 bottles a year. But I have to say, it's pretty expensive. This is definitely a gourmet club. It's not for everyone. It ends up costing about $40 a bottle, which is towards the high end of olive oil. And you also have to use a fair amount. I go through 12 bottles of olive oil a year, but the average American goes through 1. So, if you're not going to be cooking with it and using it all the time, you probably don't want to commit to that big a delivery. And there's plenty of other places. And I love the oils. And a few people I know who I've gotten an order from them say the same thing. Oh, thank you for turning me on. It's great. But if you're going to use less oil, there's other mail order places. You can also buy good oil at retail. You just need to know what to look for.
Okay. Well, what would I look for?
The most important thing about good olive oil is it to be fresh. And a lot of people don't realize this because most other kinds of oil we use, canola, corn oil, sunflower oil, peanut oil, last a really long time. People keep a bottle under their counter, under their sink, whatever. But those are all seed oils. Olive oil is the only widely used commercial oil that's a fruit oil, and you get it simply by crushing an olive. It's the oil equivalent of fresh squeezed orange juice. So as a result, it goes bad much faster than other oils, and you would not buy a huge can of fresh squeezed orange juice and put it in your cupboard open and expect it to last for 2 or 3 years, which is what a lot of people do with olive oil. Really good quality, the best quality olive oil you can buy unopened has a shelf life of about a year. And once you open it, as soon as you introduce oxygen to it, you should probably use that within a month, maybe 2. So a lot of people keep olive oil too long, including the stores. So the best thing to look for to start is a pressed on or harvested on date. Now, not all olive oil will have this, and in fact, the leading supermarket brands definitely will not have this. Only better olive oils put that date on. But again, it's harvested or pressed on you want, because olives are always crushed basically immediately. They go bad as soon as they're picked. So, they're always crushed within a day of harvest. But what you want to avoid is bottles that say bottled on, because that's really misleading. A lot of times in Europe, they keep the oil in a tank for over a year before they put it into the bottle. So the bottled on is meaningless. And the other one that you want to kind of a red flag is a use by date. And that's totally up to the manufacturer. It's not based on any industry standard. And it's often up to 3 years out, which is way too far. I mean, I was in New York a couple of weeks ago. I went into a gourmet store and I saw numerous $35+ bottles of olive oil that had a use by date of like December 2017, which is just way too far out. And then where it's from is very helpful as well, bearing in mind that it's seasonal. European olive, Mediterranean is all picked in the fall. We get it early in the year. It starts to arrive in this country. So if it's November and you're buying oil from anywhere in Europe, that oil is already over a year old. If you're buying oil in the second half of the year, you want to buy it from the southern hemisphere, like Chile, Australia, South Africa.
There's a little olive oil store in Pensacola that now I have to go visit again, because the last time I was in there, they offered cheeses and olive oil, and I'm kind of walked around. I tasted the cheeses and wasn't particularly interested in the olive oils. They were serving little cups of them so you could actually taste it. But we were in a hurry, so I didn't have time to really sit down and get into it. But I did sample some of the cheeses, because I'm also a big freak about cheese.
Actually, just really glad you brought that up, because it's something I forgot to mention. One big tip is buy olive oil places that let you taste it, which very few do. But there is this, I know exactly the store you're talking about. You go in and there's steel tanks with little probably blackboards describing each oil, and they give you little tastes. And that is actually, it's hard to describe to consumers because it's sort of a chain. There's about 500 of these stores across the country, but they all have individual names. So they seem like they're kind of mom and pop stores. They are individually owned, but they all look the same, and they all get their oil from the specialty distributor, and they're very, very good. If you live near one of those stores, it kind of takes the whole research out of it. Just go buy your olive oil there. You'll be happy.
Awesome. Thank you for that tip. I appreciate it. I knew you had some connections to Pensacola because you mentioned a fish down there, or shrimp, the black shrimp, or was it the red shrimp?
Royal red shrimp.
The royal red shrimp. Yeah, I've got to try that.
As well as grouper. And if I go to Pensacola, I'm going to eat some grouper.
Okay, well, next time I get a chance to go to Joe Patty's, I'm looking for the royal reds then. So again, in your book, I really appreciate you talk about the frauds of where they've stolen the names of good foods from different countries. pretty much just at abandon. You've talked about wine, champagne, scotch, cheeses, meats, and I guess the kind of the warning of all this is you just really have to be an aware consumer because it is buyer beware with some of this stuff. And again, I think it's an extremely valuable book for somebody to have. We covered a lot today. So going back and listening to this episode again, or better yet, getting the book, I think is a great opportunity for someone to start their education on this. So Larry, thank you so much for being on the show. If someone wanted to get in touch with you, where would you have me send them?
Well, so I have a website I had built for the book with the same title. The book is Real Food, Fake Food, and the website is just realfoodfakefood.com. So, they can reach me through there. And what I've done is I've also posted links to a number of other articles and TV shows from, 60 Minutes, Inside Edition, the New York Times, just different other resources that, on this fake food topic that may not be in my book, but I want it to sort of be a clearinghouse of information.
That's outstanding. Thank you, Larry. Again, really appreciate you being on the show. I'll make sure the links are there for people to get to your website. This is going to be older.fitness/149. So again, thank you, Larry, for being on.
My pleasure. Have a good one.
You too. If you enjoyed today's episode, would you share the link 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/149? Thank you. Next time on the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast, episode 150, I want to go back and go over the 10 foundations of health and fitness. Until then, have a happy and healthy day.